For the myriad users of VLOOKUP and HLOOKUP, I guess I just want to say two things. Please don't, and please use something else. Don't get me wrong, I think they have had their place, they've had their time, but not in a financial modelling world, and certainly not in mine. To me, the limitations and dangers of these functions steer me in other directions. So, why am I against these old-style lookup functions that have seemingly been an integral part of Excel since time began? Well, using VLOOKUP as an example, I think it comes down to three things. One, your data has to be structured in a very specific way, with the lookup range to the left of the return range. VLOOKUP simply won't work if this isn't the case. Two, Excel typically requires the VLOOKUP formula to reference a whole table of data, when you're only really interested in two columns, the lookup range and the return range. Now, this isn't an issue if the table's small, but what if it has 100 columns and say 50,000 rows? That's a whole load of calculation overhead you really don't need. And three, typically you have to manually tell Excel the number of the return range column, which means that any changes to the structure of the table, insertion or deletion of columns, can result in erroneous values being returned, possibly without the user even knowing what has happened. Not exactly ideal. Okay, so let's have a look at an example, just to remind us of how VLOOKUP works. The basic functionality requires three input parameters. It requires an input value, it requires a table of data, and it requires something to tell me which column is my return range. I'm looking for Kelvin, so in this case it would be column 3. So we write our formula, equals VLOOKUP, my lookup value, my table range, and then column 3, because I'm after Kelvin. And as you can see, Excel effectively scans down the first column. The first column will always be, of my table will always be the reference point. I've got Fahrenheit 441. I look at 41 and I pick up a value in the column 3 of 278. All good. Yeah, working perfectly. However, things might not be quite as perfect as we seem. What would happen if, for example, I insert a column? As you can see there, my values drop to 0. And the reason being is that although in my formula, as you can see here, it has extended to column G, I'm looking at column 3, column 1, column 2, column 3. Column 3 contains nothing. That would be potentially even worse if the column had data and I didn't necessarily notice immediately that that had changed. Okay, let me undo that. And let me try one other thing, which again might cause a bit of an alarm. Let's say I moved column D, and I'm just going to insert it here. Excel looks like it's lost the plot completely. Well, let's get back to the formula. Well, VLOOKUP, it's now E2, well, E's the right place. It's still looking actually from D to F, so it's looking in the right table range, but now it's looking down this column rather than the Fahrenheit column. So, again, be careful. Okay, so there are certain other methods that can be used to avoid the need for hardwiring the column index, which we use 3 in this case. But these can be a little bit cumbersome and possibly a little bit less transparent for perhaps people that are possibly less savvy than the person that's writing the formula. And as I mentioned at the start, there are other solutions, ones that most seasoned modelers would choose. The two methods of choice would be either a combination of index and match, or the relatively new XLOOKUP functions. And I will discuss each of these in other sessions, so please look out for my other videos.